No, 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 no. Dun, 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 dun,
What
dun,
it
dun.
do, YouTube? This is John Paul Janitor. I got the Anti-Partisan, and I also have Jonathan Summers on.
Howdy, folks.
Dun, 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 dun.
So
No, 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 no.
that's real nice. Tonight we're going to jib a jab about free speech and speech being violence, because the left, they won. They convinced me.
I'm on board with this too.
So speech is violence. This is the thing now.
Yep. Speech is violence.
Talking
Don't
is
come at me too
bullying.
hard, bro.
Okay, you guys have done a fabulous job of selling me on fascism so far. I'm not ready to get over all the way yet. So let's see. This will be a big one, I think. I don't see speech being violence. I see the way people interpret speech as being violence. That seems to go without saying to me. How is speech violence?
Summers, you're making way too much noise. You got to mute if you're not talking, dude.
I'm coming in.
Speech is absolutely violent because we all agree that threats are violence.
Correct.
Well,
That's just definitionally or whatever, right?
Well,
Yep.
a threat is a crime. You know.
Oh, look, you agree. Congratulations.
Okay. Give me an example of violent speech.
Let's take it down as low and simple as possible, because these people are equating the most simple of
Great
conversational
fucking minds,
interactions.
John. You see this shit?
They're taking the lowest level of conversational interactions and considering them as a form of assault, right? You've heard this kind of language before.
Hold on. So yeah, the left will take any sort of speech, even speech, that wouldn't typically be construed as violence, and they will define it as violent, like outright violent, on the same footing as punching somebody in the face. Like, for example, the left will take calling somebody a ethnic slur or something like that. That is an act of violence on par in most instances, according to the left, with punching somebody in the face. So that's what we're talking about. That's my definition. I'm using their definition.
So let's make this really simple then. Calling someone the N-word is violent.
Correct.
It's about context. It's always about context with speech.
It better be, because black people call each other the N-word all day long, man. I mean.
Yeah, they resort to violence quite a bit, don't they?
Touche. But
no, seriously, because
two brains, one mind, John.
We're only sharing one. But anyways,
half of a brain, one mind. There you go.
Yeah. No, but think about it. Okay, so if we're talking about these low agency communities that appear to be violent quite often, they don't have the faculties to reason out a conversation, to work out the details of their disagreement through words. So usually, where does the disagreement start? It doesn't start in the physical world. It starts as an idea, and then they don't have the verbal tools to conclude it in that realm. So it just spills over to violence.
Yeah, that's a big point, dude. Like, ideas themselves, that's violence right there. An idea is violence. This is the left's definition.
Well, okay. See, in here, as an anarchist for so much of my life, if I was to pick up the speech is violence thing, it would come from the state. A judge or a police officer, their speech can definitely be violent. They can inflict violence on people with their speech. So,
definitely, dude. That's like old school libertarianism, right? Like, don't violate my NAP, bro.
Yeah.
Don't threaten me with your taxes.
Yeah, I'm all nappy over here.
Yeah, but see, the libertarians consider taxing somebody like holding a gun to someone's head.
Yeah,
it's not but it's not an exaggeration, right? I mean, that's the libertarian view. And it's funny.
Yes.
It's funny because a lot of these otherwise libertarian, economists, nonsense, big brain topic guys we'll talk about how speech is free and you can say whatever you want, and there shouldn't be any consequences to that. But like I just put it out to you that like all of these libertarian turds think that you can't violate my NAP, bro. You can't hold a gun to my head when you're taxing me.
Okay, but I'm still having trouble with this in a lot of ways. Okay, let's take a big example here. Okay, and a place where there actually are hate speech laws, and the Count Dankula thing.
Okay.
Now, for anybody who doesn't know, and I'm sure anybody who's listening to this knows, he taught his pug dog to do the Nazi salute, and then did goofy pictures saying "gas the Jew" and the dog looking up surprised. What was that hate speech, or was that violence? Was that violence?
Oh, sure, totally.
Yep.
How was that violence? I mean, if we're saying it's context, I mean, the guy opened up the video saying he was doing it to piss off his girlfriend.
Okay, you're working at a level.
Good point. No, it's a good point, though.
Yes. No, and the problem is you're working under a level of reason and rationality that the general population doesn't employ.
Okay, but we're not the general population. And I mean, if the whole point of this conversation is just violence, speech is violence, and we're done, then I mean, well, let's explore it a little bit. If we're saying context matters and makes it violence, well, let's explore that a little bit. What was Count Dankula? Was the context of the way he did his video, was it violent speech?
See, here's the funny thing about speech, right? Is like you can only intend for people to take your speech in a way, right? You don't have control over it. As soon as it comes out of your mouth, it's literally up to the eyes of the beholder, or the ears in this case. So something like Count Dankula, right, which is a perfect example. I mean, clearly this was something that was meant to irritate his girlfriend and be funny on the internet. So right, like obviously we all agree that like this, he had no violent intentions, right?
No.
And this is a big problem of speech, right? Because speech, it doesn't matter what your intentions are, because the audience itself is the one that's going to determine whether or not it's violent. And it's a really scary thing. It's a really scary thing because like in the UK, they're up to like ad hoc, like you made an off-color joke and now we're going to respond with law. That's a big difference. That's a big difference than the Amerimut take on it.
Well, see, and here's the thing, because the whole trial was about context. What was the context? And as I tried to reason this out, the only reasoning I can think of they came up with is he knew those were insensitive statements to the public. He was aware of that before he made it. So in that context, they were hate speech or violent speech, which I don't know. How do you guys feel about that?
Well, I'm drinking a Silver Bullet right now, and I'm working on the other 12 of them. So, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, is that violent? Drinking a Coors Light? It's called the Bullet or whatever, right? A Silver Bullet. Like, are people that are afraid of guns gonna like see that and like freak out? Like, what's the But to get back to the Dankula thing, like obviously, you can't say anything that a Jewish person is going to be upset by. I think that's like that's so clear and so obvious, especially in places like the UK that have these absurd hate speech laws. Because like even in the US, which doesn't have these things, we still have groups like the SPLC and the ADL, which essentially, if you say anything Jews don't like, you're literally labeled as somebody that's like a violent, hostile white person that's that's a separatist that wants to burn down the country.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's tough. It's tough to understand the reality of this, because the reality of this is that Dankula did something that was going to upset people and make people really upset. It doesn't mean it's justified that they're upset or people should have sympathy for that. But definitely, dude, that's the way the courts over there are just, they're like I said, like a lot of the speech shit, it's all ad hoc. It's after the fact.
Well,
and even the laws are not firm on any of this shit. It's all ad hoc. It's like, oh, we're gonna decide based on the judge you get and the attorneys you have to deal with. That's who's gonna determine, the legal ramifications for Dankula.
And it amounts to doxing, even if you're, cleared or whatever.
Yeah, but nonetheless, like, because people want to ascribe this same kind of issue, like this free speech issue, and like the limitations on how it should be used, and that speech is or isn't violence is specifically beholden to the left, which totally isn't true. And we're seeing play out in little pieces here and there. Like recently, you had that professor in Fresno State who was one of those like screaming SJW women. And she's going to lose her job because she went out there and said some nasty things about Barbara Bush, and then people pulled up videos about her talking about like white genocide. It's like, okay, yeah. she said terrible thing. Yeah, it's like I see by the perception of certain ideologies, those things are gruff. But is that enough for a person to lose their job? Like, if that stupid person could lose their job, I could lose my job for saying stupid things on the internet?
Well, and what that immediately brings to mind, what was it, 5 or 6 years ago now? I don't remember the guy or the context or anything, but just some guy going on vacation, basically talking about, he was getting away from the wife and daughters, and he was like, getting on the plane, heading out, for a weekend with no women. Great time, something like that. Just, weekend with no women. And it he got doxxed on the internet for it. He didn't get fired, but he ended up losing his job or leaving his job because of the amount of flack he just got saying, a weekend without women.
Well, the reason why all of this has any specific weight is the action that's caused by it. It's if a person just said something terrible and you're like, whoa, that's offensive and that's bothersome to my abstract moral sensibility, that's one thing. But there's material action people feel compelled to do, like doxing or trying to get someone to lose their job or whatever, X, Y, and Z. We have, there's things that bleed into the material realm as a result of it, whether or not, and the fact that people are having these kind of material interactions with abstract ideas goes to show that thoughts are violence. Ideas are violence. Words are violence. If you can say something and it's not met with an equal amount of return, so I think all black people X, and then it gets out in the news, and then someone, news people would say something, but no, it's person said X about black people. So now let's make sure they lose their job and they can never hold any kind of public position ever, and let's put them out on the street.
This thing gets around. I think this topic gets around really, really directly to the typical normie tier Republican crap of Democrats are the real racist, right? This goes right at the heart of that crap, because if you can't acknowledge that speech has at least the power of violence or the threat of it, if it in and of itself is not violence, then you're not even going to be able to understand what the hell you're talking about. You don't understand that there's ramifications for speaking. And this is the stupid thing, the stupid myth that the dumb normie Republicans tried to sell to everybody, that you can just pretend a thing isn't so and it's going to be okay. Because everybody for the longest time in the dumb normie Republican sphere pretended that race didn't exist. And look what happened. They're the racists. It's the same thing. It's the same thing right now. Right with the think about the demon tranny reading to kids, right?
Yeah.
I look at that. Me seeing a picture of that's violence. I look at that as child abuse.
That's child abuse.
Well, yeah, it is child abuse.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a perfect example, right?
Yeah, and so what's the response to child abuse? If you were out in public and you seen someone actually abusing a child, what would be your immediate response? Would it be to go up there and talk about how you have these ethical sensibilities and they need to quit doing that because it's wrong for society? Or do you go up and have a physical reaction to that child abuse?
Well, you're right.
Because
and I
that's
get your
right. That's right where
point.
Dankula's at, right? That's exactly where Dankula's at. Because that's the claim. That is the claim. Is that Dankula is literally a virulent anti-Semite that wants to gas 6 gorillion more Jews, and that's what they're saying. That is the point of saying there's context to these things, and you failing to acknowledge there will be context is literally you ceding that you're a violent person just by virtue of you acting.
Well, and yeah, I can't argue with that. I think they're putting it forward, but I disagree with that strongly.
So it's unfortunate that this is how people react. You would hope in our current development and human evolution, we had kind of moved past that, but that's not so much the case. We're going to have to live with the reality of it. So let's give some concrete examples of how this would actually work. You walk into a bar and you walk up to someone and you call them a faggot. What is the response? Are they going to have a lively debate with you about LGBT rights and their feelings over the topic?
What's the ratio of tea to soy? I mean, I think that's a determining factor, right?
Well, okay. In that regard, you could say any number of things to people that are fighting words that are nothing illegal, nothing racial, nothing.
Let me stop you there for 1 second. Fighting words is there such thing as fighting words?
I would say, well, I don't know. For me now, no. There's nobody who could walk up to me and say anything that made me immediately want to fight unless it was a threat, but
okay, so it's a threat. That's a good characteristic to look at. Like what makes a threat, what doesn't make a threat, right? That makes sense. That's a distinction.
Well,
so let's play this out in the way our society currently runs. We have bubble wrapped basically every sector and vector of society that we interact with. And so when we're presented with something that's a threat, our threat sensitivity, the threshold for it is so low that we are now to the point where generalized conversation is a threat. And if something's a threat, that's violence. And we're at the point now where thoughts and ideas can be so aberrant to a person's head that you might as well have just physically assaulted them.
Well, and still, I would say that comes down to the listener, though, not the speaker.
Yeah. Would you say a component of fighting words is typically that the speaker has the intent? I mean, I could see that, maybe. It still seems like it's going to end up being ad hoc, legalese bullshit that's totally arbitrary in a court of law. That's my problem.
What's tickling, below this for me, okay, is two things. One, if speech is violence, well, then speech is also love. And we understand these as principles, in a large way of raising our children, that the things we say and do, even to the point where, we don't have the cartoons we had when we were kids where, they're shooting each other with guns and Tweety Bird's lighting up a cigarette, So we have definitely understood in that regard the impact that they have. But what this says to me below that, though, is that if it's the context, if it's your intent, then what we're saying is not that speech is violence. We're saying emotion is violence. That just having a negative emotion towards another person is violence.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Particularly if you manifest it in speech.
Yeah, no, this is totally that metaphysical. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, and it's part of the failing that we're starting to see in just the fundamental nature of language, because language has a really low bandwidth, and the complexity of society now and the ideas and things we're supposed to interact with, like the amount of information that moves back and forth and ideas that you're supposed to try to get across in a small conversation. Like in a 2 or 3 sentence, I'm supposed to convince someone that the gas attack in Aleppo was a false flag and make them not believe that I'm a crazy person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Good luck, buddy. No, I like where you're going though, John. That's a good thought, because we should teach our kids, to use speech well and all that, of course. But see, this is why I think the Democrats are the real racist, like normie tier republicanism is such an abject failure, because what they did is they tried to use this like speech, even this like public appearances and like behaviors thing, and they literally like forgot half of it. They forgot half of reality, and they just denied it. And I feel like a big part of this is everybody so fixated on being pleasant and nice that at some point along the line we convinced ourselves that you weren't so supposed to say mean things, and that was going to be sufficient. And then the left proved to us that that's absolutely not sufficient. People are literally ready to fight you because of a microaggression. Because you wore a Trump hat, people are willing to fight you. And so teaching people that speech is somehow like a transmission of ideas, and it's this like noble, this noble esoteric ideal, is really not a good thing to teach to kids. Kids need to understand that, like, hey, maybe it's not that there's an implicit threat of violence, constantly hovering over them, but maybe it's important for kids to know that, like, hey, like, people will fight you for no good reason.
You're going to interact with dumb people, and using your words isn't going to get you out of it, buddy.
Yeah, no, see, this normie Republicans will not agree with that at all. They don't like that.
No.
Because I'm Ben Shapiro, and I believe in a lively debate. I'm 5'3", and that's been the only way I've been able to weasel my way out of any physical altercation I've had. And I'm Jewish.
Well, I don't know. There's another thing to what Topher said a minute ago, though, which is about the complexity of speech and the low bandwidth of it. And it really kind of ticked with me for a minute because you guys know I've bitched for years about the intellect shaming that you get when you have a decent vocabulary, and it's something you get just from, reading a bunch, just from reading books, reading the news, whatever. And it's this thing you get where you don't even realize it. You have all these words, and then you start breaking them out on people, and they get offended by them. They get offended by you using big words. And this kind of ticks in me just this whole other aspect of speech being violent, and how, you don't even have to have the intent of pissing somebody off,
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So
kids need to know that. They need to know that.
Let me give you some context on this I know some big words, and my perspicacity is really awesome, guys. Let me show off my $3 word. So, when you're using an advanced level of vocabulary, maybe you have a couple of terms that aren't typically used in common parlance. The point of using those is you're trying to get a point across. And if you're trying to get a point across, language is turned into a kind of a volley thing. It's like, oh, I say a thing and you say a thing, and maybe there's a back and forth. If there's a back and forth, there's a power dynamic. If there's a power dynamic, that means someone can lose. And if someone can lose, that means there's a competition. If there's a competition, there's violence and competition.
No.
Winners and losers. Yeah, no, that's a good way to think of it. I mean, we really have tried to breed that type of thinking out of white people in the U.S. We've tried to convince them that there's this like community or culture that just surrounds everything and permeates everything, that mystically transmutes all behaviors and attitudes that are seemingly normal to outside the scope of violence, right? Or conflict even.
Well, and there's a lot of nuanced areas of it too, where, for example, let's say you see a chick who's got, a bit of a big belly, and it's there at that point where you can't tell if she's getting fat or if she's pregnant. And like, if she was pregnant, you might say something. Oh, you having a boy or a girl? Oh, great. How far along are you? But if you say that to a woman and she's not pregnant,
I mean, let me give you the depths of where we are currently in the current zeitgeist of how people are interacting socially, and maybe the depth of how far this nonsense has gone, you need to be aware of. If you're speaking to a woman and you're asking her questions, you're probing. If you're probing, you're pushing into the unknown. If you're pushing into the unknown of a woman, you're raping her. So you might as well be raping a woman with your words.
Yeah. Well, and that's, and it's funny you put it that way because, like, if it was a friend's wife or something, I'd make conversation like that. But like I have this, the principle I operate on. I have my woman. I have my wife. I have no interest in talking to other women, really. It's just not that I'm all afraid of myself or whatever, but there's no point. I really don't have anything to talk about a woman with, unless it's a professional environment or something like that.
Well, that's good because women should not be streaming, right?
Yep, correct. Women are a mistake.
There you go. They should know their place on Pinterest.
See, this is all directed violence at women. This is exactly what it is.
It is.
But it really is, because this is a space, and using that kind of language and excluding them from that. Well, if you're excluding someone from a space, that requires force. Okay. And if you're using force is a physical thing. It is not an abstract idea. It is a measurement of reality.
Okay.
It's the problem that there is a fuzzy area between the material realm and the abstract realm that our brain doesn't separate too well, and these things overlap. And unfortunately, we're in a sophisticated part of human development right now where the fuzzy areas of the abstract and the material are overlapping too much, and we're having to deal with the problems of it.
Yeah, so a woman like misreading your like, hey, how you doing today? And thinking it's a come on or something like that. That's just where we're at, man.
Yeah.
But the reality is...
the thing that pisses me off is everybody thinks we're past this shit. Or I shouldn't say everybody. There's a big part of normie culture that just assumes we're past this shit.
No, there's the wild people that think we're beyond this too.
Yeah, there are. You're right. But then there's like there's like big brain people on the right that are always telling us how far past this we are and how we're living in this age of like, open communication and dialogue as though it's some sort of like it's some sort of safe place, some sort of safe activity. It's not. There's no such thing as a safe, and it's funny because like obviously what we're saying is there's no such thing as a safe place because there's no such thing as safe speech.
Well,
this is one of the most dangerous things I hear Stefan Molyneux say all the time. It drives me about half up the wall. I'll be watching one of his videos, and his prescription for what we need to do as a community to fix whatever issue X is we need to actually go out and speak to people in meet space. How dumb are you, Stefan? Jesus Christ, you clearly are in this intellectual bubble where you don't interact with normal people.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's like any of the big leftist books that they write about how we have to fix racism by making friends with KKK members and stuff like that. It's like, dude, if a random black guy actually went up to like a violent like bonehead skinhead neo-Nazi, probably not going to be a good interaction there, guys. No. Like, why are we pushing this shit? And it's because we live in these like insular little areas. And we've convinced ourselves that everybody is the same or everybody's just like me. And like, it's the sacred cow shit where it's like, look, dude, like just get over yourself. People are different. People are going to take things you say and they're going to think a different thing than you meant.
Yeah. Well,
it's the low resolution, low bandwidth conundrum we're dealing with in our difficult times.
Well, and I think, I think there's more to it than that because what this is triggering my head and thinking, to get deeper than meta, to go nano on this, is this function of nature? Is that the degree of what we're looking at? And I mean, with communication, I mean, I remember years ago, my mom and my sisters and stuff having some friends over, and they were sitting in the living room and just gabbing, and they were all talking at once. And I remember just laughing my ass off because it was just such a woman scene. And I went out into the yard, and all the chickens were out there in the yard pecking around, just balking at each other for nothing. And it looked exactly like the scene inside the house with all those. They're just making noise at each other for no particular purpose. And then, as far as the speech being violent, that triggers with me really roosters right away. Of course, roosters just sit there all day and scream, challenging at other roosters to come around, So I have to say that's violent speech.
Okay, so what, with your little anecdote there, what you're observing is you're observing a homogenous group of people that are using one type of language. The reality is once you get out in the community and have to interact with different people at even the most finite level of differences, you're going to start to see some kind of issue. Homogeny breaks down really, really fast outside of close-knit communities.
All right, big idea, John. Like, how do you solve this? Like, what do you do to address this type of thing? Like I don't know. I feel like coming to know speech as violence. It's a really like defining, part of understanding what the hell we're doing when we're talking to people. I always say talking to people because I'm a dumbass and I don't listen very good. So when I talk to people, I always say I'm talking at them because I'm not listening.
Yeah.
But so talk at me, man. Give me some. What do you just think? Having heard this crazy leftist thing that me and Homokin have like ceded to. Like, what do you think? Like, should be the response beyond this? Like, what do you do with this?
Okay, well, I would cede the points, and basically the way I would sum it up is as what you're saying. Yes, speech can be violence as a function of nature. Like, this is the way it works. If you have bad intent, then we're calling that, and I guess we're going to call it emotional violence because that's what it's really attacking. So the question goes, well, what do we do about it then? Well, obviously, Canada, Europe, they've made laws addressing this. I really don't like the idea of making laws here to address it. So if we're just gonna admit it, well, then we're saying speech is violent. So what? Deal with it. I mean, that would seem to be the bottom line to me.
I don't think so. Deal with it is sufficient, right? Because that's been the newest genuflect of the hell is his name? Not Sean Hannity, but the good one.
Tucker?
Yeah, Tucker. That's sort of the Tucker thing is like, so deal with it. I said a mean thing. You have to deal with it. Yeah. It's not really sufficient because like people aren't really aware of it. It's like the JQ, man. Like I feel like you have one arm tied behind your back until you know what the JQ is. And I feel like the speech is violence thing is a similar thing. Like, man, if you don't know that like that even a yuppie, even like a complete like lefty like weirdo with like, gross mermaid colored hair will just like listen to you use wrong pronouns, and like if you don't know that like the way that's impacting them is like actually like you are attacking them as a person, man, you are not equipped. So I feel like we have to teach kids this stuff. We can't just teach kids that like, yeah, free speech is good because it means we can be smarter and talk. Like that's not actually sufficient. Like that's not informing people of like even the basic functions of speech, like low bandwidth aside, like the fact that like you put it as like an emotional violence, right?
Yeah.
Like people don't know that. People have no idea about that.
Well, I mean, they should.
Sure.
Okay, so let me give you one of those should things. Yeah, let me give you one of those should things that don't breach the cultural barrier very well. So, in Southern California, we have a huge Hispanic community. If you have to really actually interact with the Hispanic community, you learn a few things about their culture. And one of the things with their culture is respect is huge. And respect overlays all social interactions amongst people. And if you're not working at this level where you're having to play this little game where you're doing a level of respect in every single social thing, you're doing something wrong. And if you're doing something wrong where you're disrespecting someone, well, there's been times in our not too distant past where if you disrespected someone, there was going to be a duel.
But yeah,
but you're not saying bring back dueling, right? I mean, like that's not sufficient. I think a big part of this is addressed if we just could like, if there's some fucking mystical way to convince white people that like, hey, people don't act just like you. It's funny too because I feel like the left really tries to do this. Like they really try to familiarize everybody with the other. Unfortunately, they try and get people to worship the other, which is, completely retarded. But with the familiarity with the other, it breeds the beginning of wisdom because you begin to know that people aren't like you, or at least have different thoughts. That's really the problem. It's really the problem of like normie white people is that like they have this conception that like everybody's the same, and I think that's a big part of where this starts.
Well, it's that way for a reason,
Yeah.
Probably the oldest quote that any of us could really dig out of our head is, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do." And
yes,
that's a very important point of making, that when you go, when you are in another culture that is dominating area, it's your job to assimilate. It's your job to assimilate to the people around you and meet their standards. When in Rome, you do as the Romans do. And people don't like that rule. But again, we're talking about function of nature level stuff here,
Yeah, see, that's the problem, right? Is like the "when in Rome" quote. The "when in Rome" quote isn't something that's like shared by people that haven't heard it, like people from South America probably haven't heard, "when in Rome," right? And then they certainly don't have that reinforced when they come to the U.S. They're like, "Oh, you're in the U.S. now. Act like you're from the U.S." Like they absolutely don't have that reinforced, right? And I don't think it's sufficient just to have them know that. I don't think that's sufficient. I think you have to have like, countries have to be countries, peoples have to be peoples. Even families have to freaking like realize that like, oh, okay, we should draw some borders and lines around like our family unit or identity. And that's really like not happening at all by any metric, especially when you get your seafoam colored hair, teenage daughter running around and stuff. And you're like, what the hell is going on? What happened here? And maybe it's because, she doesn't have any sort of like value in, who she is or, where she comes from or her family or anything like that. And all she's been taught is like, oh, you have to, worship the other and the outsider. And it's just, it translates very directly to the worst type of thinking with regards to speech, right? Because the people that do this other worship, they hold these two things, which in my mind don't make any sense at all. They hold these two things together at the same time, which don't work together to me. They teach that, that speech is violence. Okay, I get that. And then they also teach that you are not allowed to be violent.
Yeah.
How do you hold that in your head? That you're, on the one hand, you're not allowed to be violent. And in some cases, you need to go out and violently attack and remove people that you determine are violent. And then you also call speech violence in general. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, it's a really like convoluted, like, fuck up it's been done to people.
It's intellectually returning us to our most base instincts, that you're not responding on a cognitive level. You're being reactive to individual circumstances. It's not that there's any forward projection of time or like past or any of these things. It's people living animalistically, totally in the present and without like sense of mind to like any kind of one thing. And the fact that like there's no shared language. Like that's another thing that pushes on to these left-wing ideas, is the fact that we can't even have a shared language in this country.
Yeah, there's so many levels to it. But what you said a few minutes ago, Topher, and I think it's kind of the point. We're talking about intent, we're talking about context. So, and if we're talking about emotion, then we're talking about being disrespectful to people. The intent of purposefully being disrespectful to people. So if speech is violence and being disrespectful to people, hurts their feelings, so disrespectful speech is wrong. Are we ready to go that far with it?
It's unfortunately that's where I'm willing to say that's where we're at right now, because the metric for it is subjective to the individual. And if that's the case, every single interaction potentially holds a level of threat to another person. And if there's a level of threat, we've already determined that threat is violence.
And I just think that's what's so scary, right? Is the only people equipped with this type of thinking are the ones that are willing to basically chastise the people that are trying to hold themselves to a higher standard. Like the conservatard people that think like, oh, well, people from South America, they're natural conservatives or whatever. Like, these are the only people that are holding this higher value of speaking. Like, and it's funny you mentioned respect, right? Because like this is a singular characteristic of of Mexican culture and community, even that they bring to the United States. And that's like, are you disrespecting me, bro? That is a feature. This is a fundamental feature of Mexican culture.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's all about respect. And sure, other people demonstrate it to some degree, but like I cannot stress this enough. Like that is like the fundamental aspect of like Mexican communication, because it sets a guide. It sets a metric that they can measure things on. And that's how they go about like instituting like these sort of like, cultural standards with regards to speech and behavior, is like they will determine it by, are you disrespecting me, bro? Yeah. And like we don't have anything that leans negative, right? Like we're in the US, we really like lean exclusively to the positive in many cases, and we actually demand that people ignore the negative implications for the sake of itself, for the sake of the thing, right? Like you have to just be able to speak and just say whatever you're going to say, and it's just going to be okay because it's just talking. And like that completely, it's the same thing. And this is why I'm going to come back to it again. It's the same thing as the stupid, normie Republicans, Democrats are the real racists. You can't throw out the half of something you don't like when it's real. It's still there.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that their ideas are wrong. Their wrong ideas will still exist despite my opinions of them.
Okay. So speech is violence. Disrespectful speech is wrong. Should we be legislating speech in any way? And before we answer that, let's note that we already have in several ways. We don't allow subliminal advertising. We don't let tobacco and alcohol companies advertise in certain places or put their message out.
That's such a good point, dude.
So should we be legislating speech?
Now, I want to hit that subliminal thing real quick. I mean, what a good point. That is such a baseline idea for how speech works that's completely wrong, right? Because the reason we banned it essentially is because you weren't able to use any of your cognitive faculty to deal with the advertisements. No, so we had this like we had this implicit like understanding that like, oh, well, speaking that is an intellectual pursuit, and the problem with that subliminal stuff is it gets around it.
Yeah,
I can't even defend myself from it.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, so, see, yeah. But we just escape. We run away from even that thought of it, like.
So there's an important point: being able to defend yourself from the violence of speech.
Well, that's the other component of it too. Is your ability to defend
these
yourself.
silver bullets are doing some real violence to my bladder. I'll be right back.
Okay. Go ahead,
Anyway.
Topher.
No, these ideas, and I want to LARP on bad ideas that are pushed by people that should be thought leaders in different communities. So, particular, you have Stefan Molyneux and Ben Shapiro, who's the worst of this community, pushing some of these ideas because they go out there and they're in intellectually insular communities. The people they interact with intellectually are homogenous. Oh, they're all smart people. It's like, oh yeah, I really, I have a lot of disagreements with Sam Harris, but at the end of the day, we're able to get along differently. It's not that their ideas are different. That's not what matters. What matters is the fact that intellectually they're in a homogenous kind of group, and there's not going to be any conflict because of difference of ideas.
Yeah.
Now, you take either one of those people and put them in a different intellectual community. I got an idea. Let's take Sam Harris and drop him in the middle of the Bible Belt in Sunday worship.
Ooh, that would be great.
Better yet, let's take Sam Harris and drop him in the middle of Sam Cedar's shit show.
Oh.
Because they absolutely think that Harris is literally promoting the alt-right. Like, this is, Sam Cedar, super yuppie left-wing, narcissist garbage, talking about, arguing for esoteric economic systems, and everything's a power structure, and we got to destroy the power structure, and just garbage. But you put Harris in the context of Sam Cedar, and now Harris is literally the aggressor. His speech is aggressive in that context.
Well, now, okay.
That's an intellectual community.
Okay, since we're talking about the fart sniffers now, and we're still on this topic, because like Molyneux is a big one for this for me. And this, anybody who's kind of leans rightish or Western culture or whatever, cracks me up. Because like Molyneux is big on the peaceful parenting, that you reason with your children, you talk to them. And this seems directly relative to the speech is violence thing,
Yep.
And a lot of people are picking up this idea, and I think it's ridiculous. I think corporal discipline is extremely important and is extremely valuable when it's used in a well-regulated and understood manner. I particularly would like it back in our education system. And these people who are sitting here arguing against it, Molyneux and these types, I don't understand how they pick up Western culture and don't understand that corporal discipline was part of our educational system for centuries coming out of the West.
Yeah. Just like dueling, man.
Let me ask you a question. Yeah. Let me ask you a question on that. So, why is corporal punishment useful with children?
Well, it's useful because there is an implicit threat of violence.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Why would you, so to correct a problem behavior in a child, and you wanted to use the most effective method, why would you pick corporal punishment over speaking to them and trying to explain to them why they're wrong?
Well,
it reinforces aversion.
Nobody would. That's such a ridiculous fucking thing to say. Just like you would beat the shit out of your kid because they did something wrong. That's why I said, regularly in an understood manner. If a kid,
I think it sets a maximum though, right?
Of course, you have to address that. But Jefferson Lee on his podcast, he was talking about this, and I said, "Well, what do you do when reasoning doesn't work?" And he said, "Well, I guess I will learn to reason better." No. There's a point where there has to be an implicit threat. And I mean, my wife being an educator, this is something I see with the school system so regularly now. Yeah, they've made all these wonderful, great ideas and different methods for addressing behavioral problems, and a lot of them really work great. They have a lot of success with them. But in any grade level, there's going to be 2, 3, 5 kids that nothing works, that none of this stuff works, not behavior contracts, not moving your damn ticket on the wall or anything else. And the bottom line is these kids with behavioral problems have figured out there is no bottom line threat of violence. They understand this. There is no ass whooping at the bottom of whatever the trouble they get into, and therefore they'll just keep going.
And I really think that's the case with the corporal punishment for kids. It's a really firm line that most kids absolutely want to avoid. They do not like it, and so what you're doing is you're like reinforcing like aversion. You're teaching the kids like, yeah, you don't want to smack, so you absolutely don't do that. And it represents the extreme end of like a disciplinary like scale or whatever. Like it's the absolute extreme, and kids do not want to interact with that. So it's not effective to do it consistently as a methodology for punishment. It absolutely isn't. Like if you spank your kid, 5 times a week, it's not going to mean shit. Of course, that's not what anybody's saying.
I had to swat one of my girls' bottoms today once, and not even hard. But the thing is, all day they were fighting. All day long they were fighting. One of them's trying to close the other one in the door while they're screaming, "Stop! Stop!" One of them kicks the other one off the chairs in mom's office and knocked things off the desk. They both hit each other in the face today with their hand. And it got to a point where trying to reason with them, I was just done. Because the older one, she was the one who kept having the problems. I asked her all day. And finally, that was it. Swat on the ass and go to your bed. You are not behaving right. It wasn't like that was the first step, it was a long process, and she knew what she did was wrong, and she hit her sister in the face. She knew she wasn't supposed to do that.
I like this idea JP was coming up with, that what it's doing is it's teaching behavioral maxims and consequence, that certain things, there's gradations in things that can be responsive as consequence to your behavior. So whatever the antecedent to it was, behavior occurred, and you need to have a proportional consequence to the behavior. And and if you're going to go up and try to have a conversation with a kid which doesn't have the same intellectual capacity or faculties that you do, and even bringing it down to their level, they're not going to be able to assimilate or interpret the idea you're trying to get across to them. They just don't have the circuitry for it. But what they do have the circuitry for is pain aversion.
And usually,
and what's funny is I know John like went out of his way to say like he didn't even do it hard, and I'm sure he didn't, and that's the point, right?
Yeah,
the threat? Yeah, you don't have to, absolutely. But the maxims conditional state of like corporal punishment is that it's explicit. This is an explicit threat to yourself. You will be harmed if you behave like this, and it's received. Yeah, it's totally received by kids.
When you get out in the real world, your boss isn't going to learn how to reason with you better. The cop isn't going to stop to learn how to reason with you better. You have to understand that there are people in this world who draw some very clear lines, and it may not always be an ass whooping, but I guess saying you're fired is violent speech too.
Oh yeah, dude. People go postal, right?
Yep. Well, it's to understand that that with all things, with every reaction, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And this even goes to social interactions, and we have to kind of, kids have to learn this in some way. And like there's power dynamics and all of these things, and they're intertwined with language the same way. Yeah. It's really dangerous because you have all these people that are on the right side of the intellectual bell curve, that like are listening to people like Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro and Steven Pinker and like all of these Jordan Peterson, all of these different people. And the general message is, as far as language is concerned, is that facts don't care about your feelings. You go into a community and use and completely destroy their social paradigm with your words, and you're able to pull apart the fabric of their society with an idea you have, and it's not going to be interpreted as violence. You got to be kidding me.
Yeah,
it's called blood sports, dude.
Blood sports is a great example. And like think about it, because guys don't have any kind of physical outlet for our dumb monkey aggression, and the only vestige we have left for people that want to spar with what faculties we have, we don't like match our physical prowess. We're battling our momentary wit against one another with dumb things and being mean to each other.
Okay.
Foot races should be the deciding factor, right? Like that's what should happen in disagreements. People should just have to do a race.
Yep.
And this triggers
my fucking chain smoking, beer drinking ass is not going to win. I hate to tell you.
Okay, but this triggers something else with me getting back into the function of nature aspect of this, of speech being violence. And an animal growling to protect its territory or hooting to define its territory and whatever. But interesting, like with gorillas, they have a thing where the grown males, even if they
have a mindset,
the dominant ones, they just go out on the hill and scream at the sky and pound their chests and do whatever else, roll around, hoot and holler. And it's not viewed as a threat, generally, to the other ones, or a coyote howling or anything like that. There is this violent release of speech, and like this blood sports, where the intent, it's intended to be violent, but it's not intended to do harm.
No, see, and that's great, right? I mean, that should be where we're at as a society. I mean, that should be what we're aspiring to, right? Like, I like that. I like that way you put it. Like, that should be what we want to head towards. And it's unfortunate that we've really like missed the bar, because everybody's convinced that speech is somehow implicitly not violent, and like facts are going to win. Facts are going to win a fist fight somehow, and it's a really good way you put it.
I don't know. Well, I think I'm getting a little tired here, folks.
It's a hard pill to swallow. It's an unfortunate one.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Do we legislate then? Is there any way that the speech could effectively be legislated? And I mean, off the top of my head, I don't think so.
So here's the social barometer, the blood test for society and how well it's doing. So, sure, the only way we're going to overcome our problems in a civil manner is with language. And once you see legislation starting to occur and it being effective and necessary, that's where we've hit a really dangerous area. That's when when the fundamental fabric of society is starting to totally unravel. And if you look at places like the UK, Britain, any of these areas where you see these really extreme hate speech laws, it's like, oh wait, look, multiculturalism has completely unraveled the hinges of society, and they're having to legislate at the very fundamental level that keeps society together: language.
Well, it's madness. I just, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you define what people can or can't say. And I mean, we do, as I said, we already do in a lot of ways. But when it comes to personal interaction, it is not the state's place to interact based on emotions.
I'm totally down with the state being involved in speech laws. The problem is we don't have any sort of advocates for sanity or like quality right now. We have only the advocates for the absurd.
Well,
and I'm really convinced of that, because clearly we don't want people walking into a theater and screaming fire. I mean, That makes sense to me. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
But we certainly don't want Count Dankula getting arrested because he taught his dog to do this cool trick. You know, I mean,
but maybe we can infringe on some individual rights that maybe we don't want a demon tranny reading to your kids.
Yeah, yeah.
Like all those ones I've seen like that, those were voluntary. Those were people who took their children to that event. It wasn't like they sprung it on anybody. People.
Yeah, again, I really mean that when I say this. These people are child abusers.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah.
I believe that too.
No, I see what you mean though. The line is super fuzzy. You involve the state, and the state's going to overextend. I think that's obvious.
Yeah. Yep.
That's what the state wants. You know, right now this state wants to grab more and more power. It's why these issues are being kept in our face. You know, I think a big thing people miss, and I'm sorry if I'm skipping topic sideways here, but it's kind of important on this legislating speech issue, is people need to understand that for the government, legislation is job creation. When you create new laws, new standards, it takes whole new departments, all kinds of new people and things like that. So, and it's the same with corporations and stuff, of course. You know, you can create this new standard that all their factories have to meet, and you'd think they hate it. They love it. They love it because it's a new standard that creates jobs, and it's something that their competitors are going to have to meet too and probably fail on. So, you know, there's this aspect of it. They
well, there's the
legislation so they can make new jobs.
The Asian California senator or whatever representative that wants to make the website laws for Californian based blogs and stuff, where if you don't employ like a fact checker or whatever, then you can't really say anything. So yeah, it's definitely job creation, even when you're talking about policing speech. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, but we're at the point now. Who will watch the watchers?
You guys have almost got me sold on the fascism. You know, I just hate fucking cops too much. Still, you know, but we'll see. We'll see.
All right, you just try this out. Our bullies. That's what we want. We want our bullies.
Yep.
It's crazy. It's just madness.
All right, guys. Hopefully we didn't make anybody's ears bleed or anything like that with all this violence. Yeah. But it's been John Paul Janitor, Anti-Partisan, and Jonathan Homokin Summers. And hope you enjoyed and listened all the way. See ya. Oh God, where's my Hangouts window? Where's my Hangouts window?